And then I'm going to go ahead and get ready to share my screen. So again, welcome to our session here on introductions and the importance of Holocaust education. And I do want to talk briefly about the, why Holocaust education is so important. And this is one thing I encounter with most teachers, and I posted a poll that hopefully you're able to view. Why don't more teachers teach about the Holocaust? What are some of the obstacles that you encounter when teaching about the Holocaust? And we do encounter many. So biggest one I often get back is time. There are many teachers that they would love to teach more about the Holocaust, the lessons of the Holocaust, but time, how do you avoid oversimplifying? How do you avoid, issues that you may have with parents? And there are things that we can do, and there are ways that we can address that. And I hope during this week we'll give you a few different tools and things that you can do. And when you begin to address the Holocaust in your classes, even if you don't teach a course on the subject. If you could also even post in the chat, if you are a Holocaust educator, and all of us are that are here, but if you teach a semester course in the Holocaust, please, if you could identify yourself in the chat and let people know that you teach Holocaust studies, because I want this event to be collaborative. I really want this to be resources not only provided by me and myself in the center, but also provided by you and each other, kind of like a professional development committee, if you will. So as far as this goes, what I'm going to start with the next section. My name is Stephen Pointer again. I'm the resource teacher here at the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center. My email is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. This is the only good picture that I take, but it's spointer@holocaustedu.org. I know all of you have that one picture you like to post, and this is the only one that I post in most of my sessions. And this was at least 8 years ago. I think I look older now. A few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. Please feel free to post questions at any time. I'm going to see if all these multiple screens will allow me to see everything that I need to inside of the chat. If I miss anything after the sessions are over, I am still able to answer questions within the chat after the fact, and we will have that happen with many of our speakers because we will run out of time. Speakers will be allowed to answer questions even after the sessions are over. So that does not mean they will get to all of the questions. There may be some they won't get to, but hopefully we can do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And I'm going to do my best to actually admit everyone as best as possible as if you come late to any of the sessions. But if you miss the session will be recorded and I'll be able to see that you attended. Purpose of this, I already kind of reviewed some of the housekeeping items. So when we start this, we'll be talking about the impact and importance of Holocaust education and obstacles to impactful and reflective Holocaust education. And that's one of the things I really want to talk about because Holocaust education is very important. And we're going to talk about the importance of that. As Mr. Wall alluded to, these are some of the headlines that we saw a few months back. First ever 50-state survey on Holocaust knowledge of American millennials and Gen Z reveals shocking results. Disturbing findings reveal significant number of millennials can't name a single concentration camp or ghetto, or believe that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed. And also, there was some percentages that believed that Jews caused the Holocaust. If you haven't seen these headlines, you should be shocked. It is, and this is, the survey was from the claims conference. People were interviewed that, believed that there were just a few concentration camps. They didn't realize there were over 40,000 concentration camps, and 49% of millennials could not name a single concentration camp. These things are concerning, but they are not the only lens or perspective that we should be using when we're thinking about Holocaust education. Shortly after, there was a response to a lot of the headlines that were coming out because it does look a lot like fear mongering in a certain way. There's cause for concern, but there's also things that we can do. And all this information was obtained from an article written by Stephen Smith, who is the head of the Shoah Foundation, executive director of the USC Shoah Foundation, and the UNESCO chair on genocide education. And what he wanted to say was this, and I agree with this to a point going through, that the claims conference was only concerned with knowledge. And I'll let you read some of the information that's here on the screen. And by the way, if you need to, please feel free to expand the window. If you can't read what's within the Google window, you can expand it if you like and come in for the questions later. But the claims conference survey defined knowledge of the Holocaust as a person who had definitely heard of the Holocaust, can name at least one concentration camp and ghetto, and knew that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And there are people from different areas and different parts of the world that may not be as familiar with lessons of the Holocaust, but this was just knowledge and information. So when we're measuring the knowledge alone, one of the citations was, how many Americans can tell you specifically the number of people who died in Hiroshima? How many Americans, even college educated students, can tell you how long the Vietnam War raged, or could name a specific Jim Crow law? And that's the point. Is I used to have students come into my classes regularly, and someone come in with a vast knowledge of World War II, of the Holocaust. They could cite dates, names, figures. But where I found a lacking was in some of the lessons we try to use in the Holocaust. They lacked an ability to reflect and make connections with the individuals who died in the Holocaust, the victims of the Holocaust. They were only concerned with the knowledge. The knowledge is definitely important, but because you don't know how many people died in the Holocaust, you should understand the magnitude. But I'd almost rather you understand the stories of the people, that we translate these numbers, these statistics into individual people. The implication of the survey, again, from Dr. Smith, says that people are somewhat anti-Semitic because they don't know the facts about the Holocaust. Denying facts about the Holocaust is definitely anti-Semitic. But there is definitely a lack of Holocaust education throughout the country, and it is up to us to try to change that and in the world. So why is Holocaust education necessary? And I'd like you guys to feel free to post within the chat, ask questions, and I'll try to get to some at the end here. But why is it necessary? Why is it so important? How do we integrate it into some of our regular classes? English language arts, integrating into civics, integrated into our U.S. history. And I completely understand some of the concerns. One of the concerns I got from teachers in Osceola County just the other day was that if you're teaching a U.S. history class and your U.S. history class only goes to the era just before Reconstruction, how do you integrate Holocaust studies in, and what do you do? And you shouldn't just arbitrarily place it in, but I think in most classes, civics, U.S. history after the fact, world history, European history, even if you were lucky enough in one of your school districts to teach sociology, anthropology, these are some great courses. English language arts, reading classes, I think there's lots of opportunities for integrating Holocaust education in, because there are things you can teach your students about. So with that, we're going to look at a second study that took place that was created by Echoes and Reflections. And you can actually find this study on the website that's at the bottom. The source is located at the bottom of the screen. And the demographics were listed as follows. And this is one thing I do like about this study, is it tells you who was interviewed. And these were primarily, primarily students. We're looking at 24% in the West, 20% Midwest, 36% in the South, and the Northeast, 20%. It was split with gender, spread across various races as well, and varying educational statuses. Of course, 90% of these were full-time college students or attended public colleges and graduated from a public high school. So what were the findings of this study? Finding number one, students with Holocaust education report having a greater knowledge about the Holocaust than their peers, and they understand the value of Holocaust education. Finding number two, Students with Holocaust education have more pluralistic attitudes and are more open to differing viewpoints. And this is wonderful. And I have students who used to come in my class and they didn't understand pluralistic attitudes. They wouldn't understand pluralism, but they understood that they appreciated each other for who they were and actually open to discussions and differing viewpoints. Finding number 3, students with Holocaust education reported a greater willingness to challenge intolerant behavior in others. This is important as well. And finding number 4. Students who learned about the Holocaust through survivor testimony showed higher critical thinking skills and a greater sense of social responsibility and civic efficacy. You'll see through the majority of these sessions that we're talking about, I am a big believer in using survivor testimony and testimony to humanize the stories, humanize the events, because we need to hear from survivors. We need to hear the voices. Students relate more to people. They are people. They hear stories of individuals and they make connections with people. And it's so important that they make these connections, because if they don't make the connection, they're just memorizing dates, names, figures, events. And it's important for them to know these things. But if we want them to continue and extend that learning beyond the classroom, we need to translate statistics into people. And I almost try to integrate some perspective of survivors, victims of the Holocaust, bystanders, as well as even perpetrators' voices, hearing from perspectives and understanding this from individual viewpoints, and upstanders. I think it's important to put that in there where we have a holistic view of what happened in the Holocaust, make connections, and especially tell stories from the perspective. There are great books out there that have teenage diaries, not only Anne Frank's, but others such as the Salvaged Pages, that allow you to read from the perspective of individuals when they were teenagers, what they wrote in their diaries, their personal stories. How much did your Holocaust education help you understand the following? And this is between, percentage of students who responded very much and extremely. Connections between the Holocaust and modern day events. The importance of individual choices and decisions, 66%. And then the importance of speaking up against stereotyping that I see around me and how the Holocaust happened. These things are important. And I found this in many of my students as well. Students who have left and after they've graduated, I had students who've come back and they have used the lessons of the Holocaust and how they view things. One of the courses I used to teach was a sociology class before we taught Holocaust education, to give them a different lens and perspective to actually integrate and be able to see the behaviors that transcend time. They would also come back and be mad because they'd say, now I'm looking at everyone's behavior and I'm taking up and I'm using this sociological lens to look at things. And it's created this complex view of the world. And it should be complex. Behaviors are complex. People are complex and do things for complex reasons. One of the results was, the results are encouraging. They indicate there's a positive outcome of Holocaust education. It's so important to integrate it into schools. The outcomes are looking at that there are gains in historical knowledge and also cultivate more empathetic, tolerant, and more engaged students generally. And I found this, again, true in classes. And many of you that have taught Holocaust studies or have integrated the Holocaust into your lessons will find the same things. You'll see students who are more engaged, more empathetic. You'll see them going home and talking about, what they've learned for the day, and they make connections that are relevant to their own lives. And as one of my examples, and being, careful, we were discussing the Jewish immigration crisis, and we were discussing, looking at the 1930s, and then discussing deportations as well. And one of my students, she began to get riled up and she got very upset, and she was talking and she began to, cry. She made these connections. She goes, I can't imagine what happens to to people like this. And my students began a dialogue because she had said that, she knew that her her family. She had her father had been picked up one time and just grabbed and deported because he had an outstanding warrant and a ticket, primarily for a couple of unpaid parking tickets, and he was here as a migrant, was undocumented. And she said, I just don't see how we can do this to people, and why we can just grab people and remove them from their homes and view them as they don't belong because he's been contributing to society for so long. And she really made this connection with it. And she began writing papers. She began getting involved. And by the end of the year, she'd actually had her father return to her, thankfully. But she really understood this, and she made a connection, a relevant connection to her life. So, looking at students who scored significantly higher than those who didn't, scales measuring critical thinking, social responsibility, justice-oriented citizenship, comfort with difference, interpersonal tolerance, social agency, pluralistic orientation, civic efficacy, and intergroup relations. This is kind of the summary one more time. I'm not going to repeat myself, but these are important things. These are things that students carry with them outside of their outside of the classroom, outside of the things that they've learned, outside of just the knowledge. They learn how to engage. And this is why Holocaust education is so important. This is why we have to continue it. And I know, again, I've seen the objections, but I want to know, what are your objections? Now we're going to try something, and I'm going to see if this my sound works on here. If I clicked on it, I'm actually going to, I might have to stop sharing because I don't believe I shared this with sound. And I'm going to try this one more time on my screen. Oh, I did not share the sound, so I'm going to share this with you. This is one of my students. Her name is Leanne Lemon. And she's recently graduated, and she wanted to make a comment on why Holocaust education was so important to her. So you should be able to hear this, so please let me know if you can't.
Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak on this subject. I took a Holocaust course in my sophomore year of high school, and it really taught me a lot, not just like information-wise, but also it taught me about humanity, ethics, emotionally it taught me a lot. It was just very moving, and it was amazing. One of my main takeaways from the class is to fight for what's right, even if you're fighting alone, because there were groups and organizations that were helping the Jews who were facing these injustices, but a lot of people kind of turned a blind eye to it and were like, oh, well, we can't do anything about it. But you can. If you fight for what's right, even if it's just you, you can change things. One of my favorite quotes is, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you are on the side of the oppressor, and it's by Desmond Tutu. And that quote is just really moving because if you're not fighting for what's right, then you are oppressing these people. Just like racial arguments in America today, like if you are not fighting for the fact that this is racism, then you are just oppressing these people more. I think it's very important we all learn about not only what took place before the Holocaust, but also during it, because it was a gradual increase. Hitler gradually got the support he needed, and this all happened pretty gradually until it was a full-blown, like, awful situation. And history categorically repeats itself, so I think it's very important that we all learn how to prevent situations like this in the future, and also to speak out on what is right, even if you're alone in it. Like, I also met a Holocaust survivor in my time in the class, and you can read testimonials and you can understand them and you can understand what happened to some of these people, but until someone who went through this injustice and this awful time sits down and tells you about it, it doesn't really click. And I think that was probably the most important part of the entire class, just seeing someone who went through this tell us about it was just entirely moving. And I think it's really important that we all have the opportunity to learn about the Holocaust and what happened during it and what the survivors went through. Thank you.
So usually when we see speakers and students like Leanne,
Thank you so
and
much
I'm
for
going to try to
giving me an
go
opportunity to speak on.
get my next one. No, Leanne was not an honor roll student. Leanne was a student who had a problem, who had problems at home. She had issues in class, and really continually kept getting more and more involved the more she read the testimonies she listened to, and she started showing up. Of course, I had to get bothered because she was only showing up to my class, and I was kind of like, you have to show up to all your classes, and you have to do all your work, and you have to engage. You can't just show up to my class because you find it interesting. And after her sophomore year, she kept coming back and showing me new things that she had uncovered and new things that it got her more engaged. And she started looking up new pieces of information. And I was so proud of her. She graduated this year, and she called and she said, "I'm not graduating at the top of my class, but I'm graduating with a 3.5 GPA, and I've decided I've worked on forming 2 different clubs and groups to help out students who are marginalized and victimized with between bullying issues and other problems, and I really want to reach out to students who struggle." And now she's also decided to join the Navy because she feels that she can learn some new skills and things within joining the armed forces. And I couldn't be more proud of her. I really couldn't. But she's not the typical student who just gets the straight A's. She is a student who came away with an understanding of the Holocaust and a way it was more emotional, more connected, and she has become, and always was, but has really become a very, very pluralistic and forward-thinking young woman, and I'm so very proud of her. Let's see if I can actually get this to go to the next slide like it's supposed to. So I've asked you this question: what are obstacles to teaching about the Holocaust? And I'd like you to post, either also in the chat, what are some obstacles? And then what are some things you can do to remove those obstacles? What are things that we can do to help you remove those obstacles? And I'm only going to talk for 3 more minutes, because then we're going to prepare for our next session. We're going to have Miss Sylvia Foti come in, and she'll be doing our next session. But I just want you to leave you with some of these things to think about and questions to think about as we go through everything. Remember, there is no single correct way of teaching, period. There is no ideal methodology it's appropriate for all educators, because all learners are different, even though we have standardized tests. And I'll bite my tongue. The recommendations offered here are just based on practical experience intended to be useful. Things to give you food for thought. Please take into account the learning needs of individuals. And this is easier said than done, because most of us will say, I just don't have the time. It's very hard. I get up in the morning at the crack of dawn at 5 a.m. I'm grading papers until 10 o'clock at night. And I understand this is hard. Teaching is a noble profession, but it is oftentimes, the reward is students like Miss Lemon. The reward is appreciation from our kids. And I know last year was exceptionally hard. It was exceptionally hard on all of us doing this type of learning, this hybrid learning. And by the way, we will probably be doing all the institutes in some hybrid fashion to give people an opportunity to join from various locations, because I'm so happy that people have joined from all over. But I want us to consider that we'll try to help provide those lessons. What do you need from us? What things will help you as teachers to integrate the lessons of the Holocaust into your classrooms? And how can you integrate those lessons and work with other educators? One of my questions also is, what instructional strategies do you use when teaching the Holocaust? Share these within your group. Since we are not all ELA, since we are not all social studies teachers, if you could, on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a thing for communities. Find ELA, find social studies, and then type in some responses to strategies that you've used within your classroom to integrate this into your class, to integrate Holocaust studies into your class. What works for you? What doesn't? These are things I want you to, be cognizant of. Another thing I'd like you to think about is, we like to ask questions of universal relevance. So how do you make the Holocaust relevant? Well, ask questions like, who gets to be a member of a community? Who's an outsider? Who gets to decide? Who decides who gets to be a member of our community? What obligations do members of the community have to one another? And what obligations to all people? How should past injustice towards an individual or group be rectified? Is unequal treatment of the law ever justified? If so, when? Is segregation justified ever? If so, when? These are things I want you to think about. What type of questions? Because there are many other questions. These are just samples to get kids talking. And all of these questions can be looked at through the lens of understanding the Holocaust, as well as comparing them to the lives with students today. These are questions students would understand. These are questions that would fuel discussion. What other questions do you think will interest your students? Think about them, post them, help all the educators within these groups, because some people, need that type of assistance as well as I do too. There are questions I haven't thought of, and I'd love to see some of your questions that you've got. Thank you very much for your time. We're going to go on to the next session. Please give Ms. Fody and I just a minute or so to make sure everything is set up so her screen is able to share. This is going to be a phenomenal presentation that we're looking forward to, and there are documents, lessons, as well as a PowerPoint for you to use in class. Here's my information. Last but not least, I'm going to post this when you at the end of sessions when you see me talk. I would like to thank you all for attending this. Stop sharing this screen here and end this session. The sessions, again, one more time, the sessions are recorded. So if you miss a part of the session, I will be posting the recordings at the end of the day. That way you can go back and view them. Please don't feel if you've missed it, that's the end all be all. I would like you to be able to review the sessions after the fact. But I will see you all in the next session. You're just going to click on the next one as we get through. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to seeing you in just a moment.